Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening everybody. Welcome back to my YouTube channel and to another installment in the construction of the Copper and Wood Chute Mountain Railroad, a small ON3 railroad currently being assembled in my workshop. If you've been following the story so far, you'll know that I have the benchwork largely complete. In this week's episode, I'm going to get the full-size track print laid out, get the track plan transferred full-size to the benchwork, and install the foam rubber roadbed for everything. So without further ado, let's just head out to the workshop and get to work. Well, I have just cleaned everything off. I am now ready to lay out the full-size track print. That arrived a while ago. In fact, it actually arrived a couple of days before I started building the benchwork, so it's here in plenty of time. So let me just turn the camera off here, get out the track print and see what it looks like. Well, I've now got the full-size track print all taped together and spread out. It took me a lot longer than it should have done because for some reason my supplier ran the strips across the railroad instead of along it. I don't know why he did that. Somewhat disappointed actually, because it meant about 3 times as many seams to tape, and each one not only takes time but is a potential source of inaccuracy. I'm going to go in for lunch now, and then when I come back out, I will start marking out the track plan full size on the benchwork. While I was inside having my lunch, I had a thought. The main reason the client came to drop off some structures and rolling stock was to make sure that everything was going to fit properly. So it'd be silly not to spend the time to take them out of the boxes and place them on the track plan, just to make sure that everything is as intended. Actually, I'm glad I did, because after I moved the standard and narrow gauge further apart earlier, thinking there wasn't enough space, I think now I've got them too far apart. I think the structure is about the right distance from the narrow gauge passenger car, but too far from the standard gauge steam locomotive. So I think what I'm going to do is move the standard gauge in an inch closer to the building, back to where it was the first time. It has been about a week or so since I've been out here. In that time I've had the track delivered, I've built the turnouts, I've heard back from the customer, and we've agreed that yes, we are going to put these tracks closer together. So the narrow gauge is going to stay exactly where it is, but the standard gauge is going to get moved about an inch towards the depot. And then at this end I'm going to save about ½ an inch between the 2 mainline tracks, and the other ½ inch in here, leaving the spacing between the standard and narrow gauge the same, so that there is room to build a narrow transshipment platform. So I'm going to get rid of the standard gauge equipment and the depot, make sure the track print is properly taped down so that the narrow gauge doesn't move, and then I'm going to cut the print and move the standard gauge as necessary. Well, that is the track print modified. Just cut it along inside the standard gauge, and I cut out the interchange area and slid it down so that both tracks still align at this end. So these 2 spurs got slid about 3 inches towards the turnouts, and obviously when I mark it out I will just extend the lines all the way to the end. I think those proportions look pretty good without wasting any space. So we've now got more room for scenery behind the track. The next thing to do is to remove all the models, make sure everything's properly taped down, and then shred it in my normal manner. Well, all the models are now safely back in their boxes, and they're not going to get damaged. And I have made sure that the track print is properly taped down all the way around the outside. Before I start shredding it, I am going to cut some roadbed the right width, because I've never done ON30 roadbed before, so I've still got to work out exactly how wide it should be. And then once I have the strips, I'll know exactly where to cut relative to the ends of the ties. I've shown my methods for marking out track plans in several videos before, but just in case this is the first project you've been following, I'll go through it again briefly. I started out by taping the full-size track plan down to the benchwork. I make sure that I tape it all the way along one edge quite securely, and then starting from the track furthest from that edge. So in this case I started by taping the outside, so then I start cutting from the inside, and I just run a craft knife down the middle of each track. Well, actually on smaller scales, the N and the HO, I run the craft knife down the ends of the ties because I'm using a single strip of roadbed. But for the ON30, I'm using fairly sharp curves, so I need to split it and put it in two sections. So I have two half strips, which means I mark the center line instead. And then I just run a Sharpie down the edge of the cut, working systematically from one edge to the other. I've now done the entire staging area, so this track print can now be thrown away. I just get it out of the way, and you can see that I now have track center lines drawn accurately on benchwork. Where I have straight and parallel tracks, such as yard areas, I don't cut the track plan all the way. Instead, I just get as far as the straight section using my normal methods, and then I mark the other end. And now I can remove this piece of paper in one go, and then I'll just get a straight edge and fill in the gaps between those two lines. And then it's just a case of going around the rest of the railroad, repeating the process, and then it'll be time to install the roadbed strips. Well, that is the whole railroad marked out. Didn't take very long because there's not much of it. When it comes to the straight portion of the standard gauge main line, I've got an edge line rather than a center line, because there I just cut the roadbed twice as wide, doing it in one go instead of two. But the curved portion of the standard gauge and the spur are drawn with center lines, and I use two separate strips. Next thing I've got to do is get all the dust off it. So I'm going to give it a really good scrub with my brush, get rid of all the dust, give the roadbed a nice clean surface to stick to, and then I will continue. Actually, come to think of it, I've just realized there's one more task to do before I start gluing the roadbed down. These two spurs at the back, one serving the mine and one serving the sawmill, they need to be raised up slightly. So before I start putting the roadbed down, I am going to get the jigsaw and cut the plywood top down between those two tracks, and then I'll be able to lift that up into position using some shims. So let me just get the jigsaw out quickly and I'll be right back. Well, those two red lines mark approximate locations for the saw cuts. The idea being that I want to get as much elevation change as I can for the mine while still keeping sensible grades, which means that these two turnouts are going to be on the grade, and then this one will level off somewhat earlier, which means this back corner is going to be raised a little bit, and the bit between the two red lines are going to be raised a little bit more. Well, that is those two saw cuts made, and I'm actually thinking it might be better to shim it up now before I put the roadbed down. Probably going to be easier to get smooth grade that way. So I'm going to delay the roadbed just a little bit longer and work on raising those grades up. Well, that is the grade lifted into the right place. Since the risers were only glued in place, I was able to tap them out with the hammer, just break the glue joints and they fall right out, and then put taller ones in. So the grade starts, well actually the vertical curve starts as soon as we clear this turnout, and the grade is constant by the time it gets to the start of the bricks. And then the level is about where the rear spur levels out and the front spur continues until it's level by these last pair of bricks. So all the areas where you might want to spot a car are level, and everything else is at a grade. It's around 2.5% or maybe just a tiny bit more. Narrow railroads tend to have steeper grades, and the client's only going to be switching 2 or 3 cars up there at the most. I could have made it steeper, but I didn't think there's any need to, because I feel we've already got plenty of grade separation here for it to look good. I still have plenty of time left today, so I'm going to start attaching this roadbed over this side of the railroad, see how far I get, and then by the time I've got round to here, I can probably get rid of those bricks, those clamps, screw that down properly, and continue. Well, I have now installed most of the roadbed on the narrow gauge. I haven't started the standard gauge over here, and I've got as far as I can without moving the bricks and the clamps and screwing down that plywood again. I also haven't done the drop flap, but that's all I'm going to do today because it feels late. The clock in my workshop tells me it's not even 5:30 yet, but it feels later than that. It's dark outside and Zeus is pestering to go in. So I think that clock might be slow. Anyway, I'm going to call it a day, going to go inside, and I will continue tomorrow morning. This morning I have just put away the clamps and the weights. Next thing I've got to do is add some more screws in to reattach the plywood top to the enlarged risers. And then once I've done that, I can continue with laying the roadbed. That is everything screwed down firmly. I've also run a bead of glue along the edge where I cut the plywood, so I may as well have that extra stiffness. Now it's back to installing roadbed. Well, that is all the narrow gauge roadbed installed. All I've got to do now is go back to the other side of the railroad and do the standard gauge interchange. And that won't take very long because there's not much of it. Well, I've now finished installing the roadbed for the standard gauge interchange. I had to go and get the turnout to put it in position because I forgot to mark where the throw bar went. This brick is here because I've added a piece of 16th inch foam on top of the 8th inch, so I can get down from the thick roadbed to the thin roadbed in 2 smaller steps instead of 1 larger one. And that way it's a lot easier just to fill the gaps with the glue. The next step is to get all my track laying tools organized and start laying the track. But that will be a topic for another video. So I'll see you then. Well, that's all for this week's episode. Hope you enjoyed the show, found it useful or interesting or both, and I hope to see you back here next week, where I will start on the track laying. So until then, thanks for watching, and bye for now.